Get comfortable. Turn the lamp down or off entirely, and let the pillow take the weight of your head. Tonight, we are going somewhere very ordinary, and I want to tell you before we start that ordinary is not the same as small. The place we are going is a farmhouse kitchen in the English Midlands in the autumn of 1871, and the person we are going to spend the next few hours with worked harder in a single day than most of us will work in a week. And no one ever wrote her name down anywhere that mattered. You have seen her before. Not the real one, but the picture of her. She stands in a doorway with a basket of eggs on her hip. Her cheeks are pink. There is a cat somewhere near her feet, and sunlight coming in behind her at a flattering angle. And she is waiting pleasantly and without impatience for the men to come in from the fields so that she can put something warm on the table. That is the picture. It is on tea tins and biscuit packaging and the covers of a certain kind of gentle novel, and it has been on them for so long that most of us absorbed it without ever deciding to believe it. The farmer's wife. Rosy. Placid. Occupied, certainly, but occupied in the way a person is occupied when they have chosen a hobby. I would like to take that picture and set it down, gently, face down, on the table beside you, and leave it there for the rest of the night. Because here is what actually happened in that doorway. She was standing in it for about 4 seconds on her way from the dairy to the hen house, and the basket was not full of eggs for the pleasure of the thing. It was full of eggs because those eggs were money, and the money from those eggs was very likely the only cash that household would see between one harvest and the next. She had been awake since 4:30. She had already lit a fire, hauled water, skimmed yesterday's milk, milked 8 cows by hand, and fed 9 people, and it was not yet 7 o'clock in the morning. The sunlight behind her was not flattering. It was information. It told her how many hours of usable daylight remained, and therefore how much of what needed doing could actually be done. And the cat was not decorative either. The cat was there to keep the rats out of the grain. Tonight I want to walk you through her day. Not the pretty version, and not the miserable version, because both of those are simplifications, and she deserves better than either. The real version. The one that starts in the dark, in a cold room, with a fire that has to be coaxed back out of yesterday's ashes, and ends by a single candle that costs enough that you think twice about lighting a second one. Somewhere between those 2 points sits something in the region of 200 separate tasks. That is not a figure I have reached for to sound impressive. It is what you get when you actually count. Every bucket carried is a task. Every cow is a task. Every child washed. Every loaf shaped. Every pan of milk skimmed. Every hen counted. Every stocking darned. Every visitor fed. Every tally kept in the head, because there is no ledger for the things she manages. 200, easily. Probably more on a market day. Historians have a term for the way this kind of labor disappears. They call it unwaged work, which is accurate and also somehow far too polite for what it describes, because it was not simply that she was not paid. It was that the work was not counted at all. The census taker who came to that farmhouse door would write down her husband's occupation as farmer, 90 acres, employing 2 men and a boy, and in the column beside her own name, he would very often write nothing at all. or he would write the word wife, as though wife were a state of being rather than a trade with a dozen specialisms inside it. She kept a dairy. She kept poultry. She fed a workforce. She nursed the sick in 3 cottages down the lane. She held the household's entire financial memory in her head, because a great deal of rural trade in 1871 still ran on remembering who owed what to whom. And in the official record of the nation, she was a wife, which is to say, an absence. That gap between what she actually did and what was written down about what she did is the real subject of tonight. Everything else is the scenery. Now, before we go, one small thing. If you find these long, slow histories useful for getting to sleep, a subscribe helps more than you would think, and it costs you nothing but a moment of thumb movement in the dark. And if you feel like it, leave a comment telling me where in the world you are listening from, and what time it is where you are. I read them. It is a strange and lovely thing to see a video like this being listened to at 2 in the morning in one country and in the middle of a grey afternoon in another. But do not feel obliged. If you are already halfway to sleep, stay there. That is the point of all this. Let me tell you what we are not going to do tonight either, because it matters. We are not going to spend the next few hours feeling sorry for her. That is its own kind of condescension, and it is nearly as useless as the tea-tin picture. This woman was extremely good at her job. She could tell by the feel of cream between her fingers whether the butter would come in 20 minutes or an hour. She could look at a pig in October and know within a few pounds what it would yield. She could judge the heat of a brick oven by holding her forearm in the mouth of it and counting. These are not soft skills or homely instincts. They are the accumulated craft knowledge of a working life, learned from her own mother and refined over 11 years of marriage. And in any other context, we would call them a profession. So we are going to hold 2 things at once, all the way through. The first is that she was skilled, capable, often satisfied, and by no means a victim of her own competence. The second is that the structure she worked inside gave her almost no legal claim on the results of that competence. And that structure was not one she chose or could easily have changed. Both things are true at the same time. Most real lives are made of exactly that kind of double truth, and the ones that flatten into a single message are usually the ones somebody has tidied up afterward. Here is the day ahead of us. Roughly, we will begin before dawn, in the dark and the cold, with the fire and the water and the first walk out to the dairy, while the rest of the house is still asleep. We will go into the cowshed at 5, and I will tell you how much milk a cow of this period actually gave, which is a great deal less than a cow gives now, and how long it took to get it out of 8 of them by hand. We will come back in for breakfast at 6:30 and feed 9 people. And we will talk about bread, which sounds like the least interesting subject imaginable until you learn how many loaves a household like this got through in a week, and what it took to produce them. We will send some of the children to school and keep one of them back, and we will look closely at that decision, because a new Education Act had come in the year before, and it landed on farm families like a bill they had not budgeted for. Then the churn, then the butter, salted and printed with the household's own mark, because that mark was a reputation, and a dealer at market could refuse the whole basket if the reputation had slipped. Then out to the yard for the hens and the pig, and we will talk about why the yard belonged to her in a way the fields did not. We will stop at noon for the main meal of the day, which she will cook for everyone, and largely not sit down to eat. We will go into the market town in the afternoon, with crates in the back of a cart, and we will stand at a stall and haggle, and we will look at the coins that come back, and ask the very awkward question of who, in 1871, those coins actually belonged to. The answer is not what most people expect, and it had only just begun to change. Then evening, supper, and afterward the long, quiet tale of the day that nobody in the household would have described as work at all. The mending basket, the stockings, the accounts, held mostly in her head. A knock at the door from a neighbor whose child has a fever. Because in a village like this, the farmer's wife was the nearest thing to a nurse for 2 miles in any direction. And then the last walk through the dairy, and the bolt drawn, and the fire covered over, so that there is something left to build on in the morning. And a candle put out, and a very long list of tomorrow assembling itself in the dark behind her eyes, whether she wants it to or not. That is the shape of it. 18 or 19 hours, depending on the season, on a tenant farm of about 90 acres, in the year 1871. So let the room go soft around you now. Let your shoulders come down from where they have been sitting all day. There is nothing you need to remember from any of this, and nothing you are going to be asked about at the end. If you drift off in the cowshed and wake up somewhere in the middle of the market town, that is exactly right. That is what this is for. The lamp is out, the night is cold and clear, and there is frost coming, though not yet. Let us go back. The year is 1871. The month is late September, the last week of it, and the place is a tenant farm of about 90 acres in the English Midlands, a few miles out from a market town, whose name does not matter very much, because there were 400 towns like it, and 200,000 farms of roughly this size, and the shape of the life was much the same across all of them. 90 acres. That is a number worth holding on to, because it tells you almost everything about the household you are about to wake up inside. It is not a great estate. It is not a small holding either. Not the sort of 4-acre patch a family works with their own hands, and nothing else. 90 acres is the middle. It is large enough to require hired labor, a horse team, a proper dairy herd, and a rent that arrives with the reliability of weather. It is small enough that everyone in the house works, including the farmer, including his wife, including the children, who are old enough to carry something without dropping it. There is no drawing room here. There is no piano. There is a parlor, kept cold and unused except on Sundays and at funerals. And there is a kitchen. And the kitchen is where the entire life of the household happens. Feel the floor first. Flagstones laid straight onto the earth. And in late September, they are cold enough that you can feel the cold through the soles of your boots and through 2 pairs of stockings. They will be colder in January. They are never warm. In August, after a long dry spell, they are merely cool, and that is the best they ever get. The whole ground floor is like this. Stone in the kitchen, stone in the dairy, stone in the passage and the back scullery, brick in the yard outside. Nothing here holds heat except the fire and the bodies of animals. Second, the smell of wood smoke, and under it coal smoke, and under that the particular sourness of a room where people have been eating and working and sleeping in wool for a long time without much in the way of ventilation. Because ventilation in a Midlands autumn means being cold, and being cold is a thing you avoid where you can. It is not a dirty house. You would be insulted, quite genuinely and quite deeply, if anyone suggested it was. It is scrubbed constantly. But scrubbed is not the same as aired, and the smell of a farm kitchen in 1871 is a thick, layered, lived-in thing that a person from our own century would notice for about 10 minutes, and then stop noticing forever. And third, the dairy. Go through the door at the north end of the kitchen, the one that stays shut, and the air changes completely. It is colder in there by several degrees, deliberately so, north-facing, thick-walled, stone-shelved, and it smells of cold milk and scalded wood and a faint, clean sharpness that comes off the slate and the scoured tin. There is no smell quite like a working dairy before dawn. It is one of the few rooms in the house that smells of nothing human at all. Now, you are 34 years old. You were married 11 years ago, in the parish church about a mile down the lane, and you have had 6 children in those 11 years, and 4 of them are living. The eldest is a girl of 10, then a boy of 8, another boy of 6, and the youngest, a girl, is not yet 2, and spends most of her waking hours on the kitchen flags within arm's reach of wherever you happen to be standing. There is also a hired girl of 15 who sleeps in the small back room off the passage, who came to you in the spring from a family 3 villages over, who is paid something in the region of £6 a year, plus her board, and who is not very good at her work yet, but will be by next summer, if you are patient with her, which you are trying to be. And there are the men. Your husband, who is 39, a carter who lives in and eats at your table. And at this time of year, in harvest and just after, extra hands, daymen, sometimes 2, sometimes 4, appearing at the gate in the morning and expecting to be fed at noon, because that is how it works, and always has been. So the household you are cooking for on an ordinary day this week is 9 people. On a bad day, it is 11. You will not know which until you see who comes up the lane. Here are the material facts, plainly, because they govern everything that follows. Your husband holds the lease. Not you. The farm is rented from a landowner whose agent you see twice a year, and whose face your husband knows better than you do. And the rent is paid at Michaelmas, which is the 29th of September, which is to say the day after tomorrow. It is somewhere in the region of £120 for the year, give or take, depending on the land and the county, and whether the last agreement was struck in a good season or a bad one. That money has to exist by Thursday. Some of it is already put by. Some of it is not. Everything grown on this land belongs to your husband. Everything sold off this land belongs to your husband. The butter you will churn tomorrow morning. The eggs you will collect at 11. The cheese sitting under weights in the cool room. The pig fattening in the sty against the wall of the barn. The coins that come back from the market town in a tin on the kitchen shelf. All of it, in the eyes of the law as it stands in 1871, is his. Not shared, not jointly held. His absolutely and entirely, along with any wages you might have earned, had you gone out to earn any, along with any money you brought into the marriage, along with anything you might inherit tomorrow from an aunt who liked you. There is an Act of Parliament that has just changed a small corner of that. It was passed the year before, in 1870, and it is the first crack in a wall that had stood without a crack in it for centuries. It is a narrow act, and it does not do nearly as much as its name suggests, and we will come back to it properly in the afternoon, when there is money on the table to look at. For now, hold this. On this September morning, the law regards you and your husband as one legal person, and that person is him. That is the situation. And here is where we have to stop and correct the story, because if we go into the day carrying the wrong idea, the whole day will look like something it is not. The picture most people carry of a farm household in this period runs roughly like this. Out there, beyond the yard gate, in the fields, is the farm. That is where the work is. Ploughing, sowing, reaping, hedging, the horses, the weather, the harvest, the sweat, the muscle, the risk. And in here, on this side of the door, is the house. The house is where the farm rests. It is where the men come in to be fed and warmed and sent out again. It is domestic. It is soft. It is the recovery room attached to the real enterprise. That picture is not merely incomplete. It is upside down. What is actually on this side of the door is a second farm. It has its own herd, in the sense that the dairy cows are milked and managed by you, and the milk becomes your material the moment it leaves the animal. It has its own livestock, in the poultry and the pigs, which are yours to feed, breed, doctor, kill, cure, and sell. It has its own manufacturing, in the butter and the cheese, which are not cooking but production, carried out to a standard, to a schedule, with equipment that has to be maintained and temperatures that have to be held. It has its own workforce, in the hired girl and the older children, who are yours to direct. It has its own supply chain, in the bread and the bacon and the preserves that feed 9 people 3 times a day, 365 days a year, without a shop worth the name within 4 miles. It has its own accounts, kept in your head, and in a small book if you are literate, and in your head alone if you are not. And it has its own customers, in the dealer at market, and the neighbors who buy a pound here and a dozen there at the door. The dairy alone, on a farm this size, could bring in something like 30 or 40 pounds across a year in a decent season. Set that against a hired farm labourer's wage of about 12 shillings a week, and you find that the butter and the eggs and the poultry, taken together, are producing the equivalent of a full-time working man's income, sometimes rather more, out of a set of rooms that no one in the parish, including your husband, including possibly you, would describe as a place of business. That is the fiction. Not that you are idle. Nobody who ever set foot on a farm believed a farmer's wife was idle. The fiction is subtler and more useful than that. The fiction is that what you do is housekeeping, and what he does is farming, and that the difference between those two words is the difference between maintenance and production. It is a fiction that survives because it is written into the lease, into the census, into the law, and into the way the money moves. And it survives because you are on the whole too busy to argue with it. So keep it in mind as we go. Because the day we are about to walk through is not a day of chores. It is a day of production, and you are the one running it. And there are about 200 separate things in it, and the first of them starts in the dark, some hours before anyone else in this house opens their eyes. It is 4:15 in the morning. The fire went out 3 hours ago. Nobody is awake yet. You are about to be. There is no clock in the room. There is one downstairs, in the kitchen, and it gains about 4 minutes a week, and you correct it on Sundays against the church bell. Up here, there is only the dark and the particular quality of it. And after 11 years of marriage and 4 children and a dairy to run, you have learned to read that dark the way other people read a dial. It is not the flat black of midnight. It has begun to thin at the edges, very slightly, the way ink thins when water gets into it. That is your signal. You are awake before you have decided to be awake, which is a different thing from waking. And anyone who has kept animals will know exactly what it feels like. The room is cold. Not the sharp cold of January, which will come, but the damp, settled cold of late September, in a house with stone walls and no fire in it since 1 in the morning. You lie still for a count of perhaps 10 breaths. This is the only 10 breaths in the day that belong to nobody, and you take them. Then you swing your legs out and put your feet on the boards. You dress in the dark, standing, and you can do it without looking because the order never changes. Shift first, the one you slept in, which stays on, then stays, laced at the front, loosely, because you will be bending and lifting and reaching over a churn all morning, and a woman who laces herself tight at 4:30 in the morning has misunderstood her own day. Petticoat. Second petticoat, the flannel one, because of the dairy. Gown over that, the working one, the brown stuff gown that has been turned once and patched twice at the elbow. Apron. A second apron folded over your arm for the dairy. Clean, kept separate, never worn in the yard. Cap. Boots left by the door, laced by feel. You do not light a candle. This is worth understanding properly, because it is one of the small facts that explains the shape of a whole century. Candles cost money. Tallow candles, the cheap sort, made from rendered fat, ran somewhere around 6p a pound in this decade, and a pound gave you perhaps 8 or 10 candles, and a candle burned down in a few hours. Wax candles, which smelled clean and burned bright, were 4 or 5 times the price, and appeared in this house at Christmas and at funerals, and nowhere in between. So the household budget for light is a real budget, and it is one of the budgets you keep, and the rule you have made is simple. No candle burns for a task that hands alone can do. Your hands can dress you. Your hands can find the stairs. Light is for work that needs eyes. You go down. The 4th stair from the bottom announces itself, and you step over it out of habit, not to spare the sleepers, who could sleep through cannon fire, but because 11 years of stepping over it has made stepping over it easier than stepping on it. The kitchen is the coldest room you have been in yet, because it is stone-floored, and because the fire is out. Here is the first task of the day, and the one everything else waits on. You kneel at the hearth on the flagstones, and the flagstones are cold enough to come through 2 petticoats in about 4 seconds, and you begin to rake. The grate has to be cleared of yesterday's ash, but not all of it. This is a skill, and nobody ever taught you it in words. A bed of fine ash left in the bottom holds warmth and gives the new fire something to sit on. So you rake the coarse cinders forward into the ash pan and leave the soft grey underlayer where it is. Then you go looking, with a poker and with your fingers, for the thing you buried before you went up last night, which is a knot of embers packed under ash, covered deliberately, banked. If you did it well, and you generally do, there is still heat in there, and when you break the crust with the poker, you will get a dull red eye looking back at you out of the grey. Tonight you have one. It is small, no bigger than a walnut, but it is alive. The alternative is the tinderbox, or one of the new Lucifer matches, which exist and which are sold and which this house buys in a box of 100 and treats like a small luxury. Getting a fire from nothing takes 10 minutes and a certain amount of temper. Getting a fire from a banked ember takes 2. Multiply the difference by 365 mornings, and you begin to see why the fire in a farmhouse kitchen was, in the most literal sense, never allowed to die. It was fed at night, covered and resurrected in the morning, and the woman who let it go out entirely was not scolded so much as pitied, because everyone knew exactly what her next quarter of an hour was going to be like. You feed the ember. Dry shavings first, from the box by the hearth, then the small stuff, twigs and split kindling that the boys are supposed to bring in, and that you have chivied them about twice this week. You blow low and steady, with your face near the floor, and the red eye widens and takes, and there is that first small crack of a twig catching, then the larger wood, then, last, the coal, because you are near enough to a canal and a colliery that coal comes by cart and is affordable, which was not true of your mother's kitchen 30 miles further out. The light comes up. That is the moment the room turns from a black box into a place with corners. The dresser resolves. The long table. The row of hooks. The clock says 22 minutes to 5, which means it says 18 minutes to 5, which is close enough. Now you can put the kettle on, and you swing it in on the crane, and you do not wait for it, because water is the next thing, and water is heavier than fire. Consider the water for a moment, because it is the single most underrated fact of a 19th century woman's life, and almost nobody thinks about it. There is no tap in this house. There is no tap in most houses in England in 1871, and there will not be one here in your lifetime. There is a well in the yard, brick-lined, about 30 feet down, with a windlass and a rope and a bucket. And there is a pump at the far end of the yard nearer the shed that serves the stock. Every drop of water that enters this house arrives on your arms, or your daughter's arms, or the hired girl's arms. Now think about what that water has to do. It has to make tea for 9 people, twice at least. It has to wash the dairy things, which is not ordinary washing but scalding, repeated, with water hot enough to hurt. It has to boil the potatoes, and the pudding, and the bacon. It has to wash the floor, wash the children, wash the clothes on the day set aside for it, and be carried out again as slops. A household of this size, keeping a dairy, was moving something on the order of 30 or 40 gallons a day, and on wash day considerably more than that. A gallon of water weighs 10 pounds. A full wooden bucket, 3 gallons or so, is 30 pounds plus the bucket, carried at arm's length, across a yard, in the dark, in the mud, without spilling, because spilled water means going back. Nobody wrote that down as work. It appears in no account book. But if you wanted a single measure of how a farm wife's body was used up between 20 and 50, you could do a great deal worse than to weigh the water. You take 2 buckets out now. The yard is properly dark still, and cold, and smells of last night's rain on muck. The rope of the windlass is wet. You draw, brace, swing the bucket in, tip it, draw again. Then you carry the pair back, one in each hand, arms straight, shoulders down, which is how it is done. And you do not think about it any more than a man thinks about walking. 1 bucket goes to the hearth, the other goes with you into the dairy. And here is where the day properly begins. The dairy is on the north side of the house, deliberately, and it has a stone floor and a stone shelf a foot thick running along 2 walls, and 1 small window facing away from the sun. It is the coldest room in the building, and it is meant to be. Yesterday evening's milk is standing on that shelf in shallow, lead-lined pans, wide and flat, and it has been standing there overnight so that the cream can come up. This is temperature discipline, and it is not a poetic phrase. Cream rises best somewhere around 50 to 55 degrees. Too warm and the milk turns before the cream is properly up, and everything below it is wasted. Too cold, and it comes up slowly and thin. You have no thermometer. What you have is the back of your hand against the pan, and the knowledge, acquired over 11 years, of what this room feels like in September as against June, and the window you open 2 inches or close entirely, and the door you prop or shut. People who write about dairying in this decade are already recommending thermometers, and some of the larger dairies have them. You manage it by hand, and your butter has never once been refused. You put the clean apron on. You wash your hands in cold water, hard, and dry them. Then you skim. The skimmer is a shallow, perforated disc on a handle, and the movement is a long, slow, shallow sweep just under the surface, lifting the cream off in a thick fold and turning it into the cream pot without breaking it up and without taking milk with you. Slow is faster here. A hurried skim leaves cream in the pan and puts milk in the pot, and both cost you 8 pans. It takes about 20 minutes, and your hands go numb. You are halfway down the row when you hear the back door, and then feet on the flags, and the hired girl comes in with her cap crooked and her boots unlaced, a full quarter of an hour after she was wanted. She is 15. She has been here since Lady Day. She stops in the doorway, with the particular stillness of somebody waiting to be shouted at. You do not shout. You say, without looking up from the pan, that the buckets want filling again, and that she can take the yoke, and that tomorrow she will be down when the fire is lit, and not after. That is all. It is enough, and it is deliberate, because she is going to be beside you for the next 16 hours, and a girl who has been humiliated at 5 in the morning is a girl who will drop something at 4 in the afternoon. She goes. The pans keep coming. By 5 o'clock, you are across the yard with a lantern and a 3-legged stool under your arm, and the cowshed door is warm when you open it, warmer than the dairy, warmer than the house. 8 cows breathing in a low building for a whole night makes its own weather. The air is thick with hay dust, and the sweet ammoniac smell of a byre that has been mucked out but not scrubbed, because no byre is ever scrubbed. You hang the lantern on its nail, and the light goes yellow, and swimming over 8 broad backs. They know you are there before you speak. There is a shifting, a chain rattling on a post, one of them turning her head as far as the tie will let her. There is an order, and you did not choose it exactly. It grew. You milk the old red cow first, because she has been milked first for 6 years, and lets her milk down easily, and sets a rhythm for the rest of the shed. You milk the young one third, in the middle, where she is calmest, hemmed in by animals that are behaving. You milk the black one last because she kicks. That is not a figure of speech. She kicks with the near hind leg, forward and sideways, and she does it without warning, and for no reason you have ever been able to identify. And she has put the pail over twice, and your shoulder into the wall once. So you milk her last, when the pail behind you is already full and safe, and standing on the shelf, and you hobble her, which means a short leather strap buckled above both hocks, so that she can shift her weight but cannot swing. Some farms use a rope. Your husband thinks the strap is soft-handed. You think a strap costs 1 and 6, and a spilled morning's milk costs a good deal more. You sit down to the first cow. The stool has 3 legs, because a 3-legged stool does not rock on an uneven floor, and a byre floor is never even. The technique is not pulling. Everybody who has never done it thinks it is pulling. What you do is close the thumb and forefinger at the top of the teat to trap the milk that is already in it, and then close the remaining fingers down in sequence, middle, ring, little, so that the trapped milk is squeezed downward and out in a stream, and then you release the whole hand at once so the teat refills from above. Then the other hand, already halfway through its own cycle. Left, right, and the 2 streams go into the pail slightly out of time with each other, and the sound changes as you go. A hard ringing hiss on the empty tin, then a softer sound, then almost nothing at all as the milk goes into milk, and the foam builds up above it. Your forearms do this, not your shoulders, not your back, though all of those ache by the end. It is the flexors of the forearm and the small muscles of the hand, opening and closing, roughly 100 times a minute, for as long as it takes. For a good cow in full flow, 8 or 9 minutes. For one who is drying off, or slow, or unhappy about something. 15. You are stripping the last of it out at the end of each animal, the final ounces, and you do not skip that even when you are tired, because a cow that is not milked out thoroughly gives less tomorrow, and less again the day after. And a dairy woman who lets that habit start has cut her own year's income by the middle of November. 8 cows. A little over an hour if nothing goes wrong. Rather more if something does. And here is a figure worth slowing down for, because it is not the one most people imagine. A good Midlands dairy cow in this decade, on grass, in September, gives you something in the region of 6 or 7 quarts at a milking, call it 1.5 gallons. Morning and evening both, so around 3 gallons a day from a cow who is doing well. Over a full lactation, a decent animal might give you 400 gallons in the year. The enormous modern figures belong to a different century and a different animal entirely. These are small cows by any standard you would recognize now. Shorthorn-ish, mixed, kept as much for the calf and the eventual carcass as for the milk, and fed on what the farm can actually grow rather than on bought cake. 8 of them, then. Something like 24 gallons of milk a day across 2 milkings. In a good month, less as the season turns, and the grass goes off. None of it is sold as milk. That matters. There is no railway siding near enough, and no town close enough, and no reliable way to get liquid milk anywhere before it turns. So the milk is not the product. The milk is the raw material. What leaves this farm and comes back as money is butter and cheese and the skimmed milk that goes to the pigs and the calves, which is to say, the milk leaves eventually in the shape of a pig. So the arithmetic runs like this, and you have never written it down, but you could recite it in your sleep. It takes somewhere between 2.5 and 3 gallons of good September milk to make a pound of butter. Call it 2.5 when the cream is rich, and rather more when it is not. From your 8 cows, working the whole dairy properly, you can put up something like 8 or 9 pounds of butter a week, sometimes 10, and rather less once you have taken out what the house eats and what goes into the cheese. Butter at the market town this autumn is fetching around 1 shilling a pound for ordinary stuff, and up to 1 3p for the best, and yours is generally the best, which is a sentence you would never say aloud to anybody. £9 a week at a shilling is 9 shillings. Some weeks 11. In high summer, with the cows at their fullest and the grass at its best, rather more than that. In the dead of winter, when 3 of the 8 are dry and in calf, and the rest are giving thin milk on hay, almost nothing at all. Averaged across the year, the butter brings in somewhere between 15 and 20 pounds. Add the eggs, which in a good year run to another 8 or 10 pounds, and the odd cheese sold whole, and the poultry sold off in the autumn, and the total that passes through your hands and into the tin on the kitchen shelf is comfortably over 30 pounds in the 12-month. Hold that beside the other numbers on this farm. A hired farm labourer in this county this year is earning about 12 shillings a week, and less in winter, which comes to perhaps £30 a year for a grown man working outdoors 6 days a week. The hired girl in your back room gets £6 a year, and her food and a bed. The rent on these 90 acres, paid at Michaelmas, is something in the region of £140. So your butter and your eggs, produced between 4 in the morning and whenever the evening milking is finished, in the gaps between feeding 9 people 3 times a day, come to roughly what a grown man earns at full-time wages. And unlike the wheat, which is sold once at harvest and gone, and unlike the store cattle, which are sold once in the autumn and gone, your money comes in every single week of the year. That is the part that matters, and it is the part that gets left out of the pastoral picture entirely. Between one harvest and the next, there is a long stretch, most of a year, in which very little cash comes onto a farm like this at all. The corn is sold, and the rent is paid, and what is left has to stretch. Meanwhile, the blacksmith wants paying, and the shoemaker, and the doctor if anybody needs him, and there is salt and sugar and tea and soap and candles and cloth, and none of it grows here. The money that meets all of that, week by week, hand to mouth, through February and March and the hungry gap of April, is butter money and egg money. It is the household's working capital. It is the only regular income the place has, and it is not yours. That is not a bitter observation. It is simply the law. Your husband holds the lease. Under the common law as it stands, A married woman's earnings and personal property belong to her husband. And though there is an act passed only last year that lets a married woman keep her own wages and certain savings, it is a narrow thing, poorly understood in the countryside, and it does not touch the produce of a farm held in her husband's name. What you make in that dairy is legally his. The cows are his. The tin on the shelf is his. In practice, in this house, the tin is yours. You take from it, you decide what it buys, you keep the count in your head, and he does not ask. That arrangement holds in a great many farmhouses, and it holds because it works, and because everybody involved knows perfectly well who earned it. But it is a custom, not a right. It rests on the goodwill of one man, and customs of that sort tend to hold beautifully right up until the moment they are tested. The black cow does not kick this morning. She stands with the strap above her hocks and lets down her milk, and is finished in 11 minutes, and you unbuckle her and rub her hip once with the flat of your hand as you go past, which is not sentiment. It is the same thing you did to the hired girl in the dairy 20 minutes ago. The pails are full and heavy. 2 gallons of milk weighs something over 20 pounds, and the pail itself is not light. You carry them across the yard, one in each hand, arms straight, shoulders down, going slowly over the wet cobbles, because a fall here costs the morning. Into the dairy, through the muslin strainer, into the clean pans, into the cool of the room, the lantern back on its hook. Against the far wall, the churn is standing ready, scalded last night and dried, its lid off, waiting. You will not get to it for 3 hours. There are 9 people to feed first. 6:30, and the kitchen has to become a different room than it was an hour ago. You come in from the dairy with your sleeves still turned back, and the cold of the cool room in your forearms, and the fire has been doing its work without you. The kettle is at a mutter. The great pot swung over the heat on its crane holds water that has been climbing toward the boil since before you went out. The hired girl has the table half laid, wrong, in the way she lays it wrong every morning. The knives on the left, and you move 4 of them across without saying anything, because there is not time this morning to make it a lesson. 9 people will eat in this room within the next 20 minutes. Yourself, your husband, 4 children, the hired girl, and the 2 laborers who lodge in the village and walk up for their food because their food is part of what they are paid. In 3 weeks, when the last of the root crop comes up, there will be 11. Feeding is not an event in your day. It is a machine you run 4 times daily, and the whole rest of the day has to be fitted around its starting and stopping. The bacon comes off the flitch that hangs from the beam over the hearth, wrapped in its cloth, blackened outside, and you cut it thick because thin bacon is an insult to a man who is going to lift things until noon. It goes into the great iron pan, and immediately the room smells of it, and the smell reaches upstairs faster than any calling would, and there is movement over your head, the particular hollow knocking of a child's heel finding the floor. Here is what is actually on the table this morning, because the answer surprises people who have decided in advance that farm food was either wretched or wonderful. Bread, a great deal of it, cut in slices as thick as your thumb, from a loaf baked the day before yesterday. Bacon, 4 rashers each for the men, 2 for the older children, 1 chopped small into the youngest one's bowl. cold pudding left from last night, the plain boiled kind, sliced and laid in the bacon fat in the pan to warm through and take on some of the salt. A dish of butter, your own, from the crock, not the printed pounds that go to market, but the working butter kept back for the house. Tea in the big brown pot, made from leaves that were also used at supper yesterday, and dried on the hob overnight to be used again, which is not poverty exactly. It is thrift practiced so consistently that nobody in the room can remember a time when tea was made any other way. Milk in a jug, as much as anybody wants, because milk is the one thing in this house that costs nothing at the table and everything at the market. Every cup a child drinks is a fraction of a pound of butter not made. You pour it anyway. You have never once been able to bring yourself to measure it. That is breakfast in a Midlands farmhouse in the autumn of 1871, and it is a great deal better than what a farm labourer's wife 3 fields away will put in front of her family this morning, which will be bread, and dripping if there is any, and tea, and perhaps nothing else at all until evening. The bread deserves slowing down for, because bread is where a farmhouse kitchen's real arithmetic lives. You did not buy that loaf. There is a baker in the market town, and there are farm wives now who have started buying from him. And you know exactly what they pay, and you consider it once a fortnight and reject it every time. You bake, which means that the day before yesterday, in the evening, after the supper things were cleared, you mixed the sponge, flour, and water and balm from the brewing, and set it near the fire under a cloth to work overnight, which means yesterday morning, between the milking and the churning, you took that risen sponge and worked it into something like a stone and a half of dough, kneading with the heels of both hands against the board until your shoulders burned, and set it to rise again, and knocked it back, and shaped the loaves. And then you heated the oven. The brick oven in the wall beside the hearth does not have a fire under it, which is the thing most people misunderstand. You build the fire inside it, faggots of thorn and brushwood, lit in the oven's own belly, burning for the better part of an hour and a half until the bricks glow and the soot on the roof of the oven burns clear away, and you know it is ready not by any instrument, but because the black has gone white above your head. Then you rake every ember out. Then you swab the floor of it. Then you slide in the loaves on the peel, in the right order, the biggest to the back, where the heat holds longest, and stop the door with a board and clay and leave them to the bricks. That oven, once heated, is the most valuable thing in your kitchen for about 6 hours, and you would no more waste that heat than you would pour milk on the ground. So the loaves go in first, and when they come out, the pies go in, and after the pies a dish of apples, and last of all, when the bricks have given up most of what they have, a pot of something set at the back to cook slowly overnight. 1 firing, 4 separate meals worth of work, all of it planned in your head 2 days in advance. A household of this size gets through something in the region of 50 or 60 pounds of bread a week. That is a baking of 12 to 14 large loaves, twice a week, every week, for 11 years now, and it will go on for however many years are left. The wheat came off your own land, went to the mill, came back as flour, and a portion of it stayed with the miller as his payment, which is a form of taxation. nobody calls taxation. So when a slice of that bread is cut too thick or left on a plate, you notice. Not because you are mean about it, because you can feel the whole of that chain in the palm of your hand, the hot bricks and the hour and a half of thorn faggots and the shoulders, and it makes waste feel less like a small sin and more like a personal injury. They come down in a rush, the way children always do, and the room fills. Watch where everybody puts themselves, because this is not accidental, and nobody has ever had to explain it to a single person in this house. Your husband sits at the head of the table, at the end nearest the fire, in the one chair with arms. Your eldest boy sits at his right hand, which he has done since he was about 9, and which he has never been told to do. The 3 younger children fill in along that side and the near end. The 2 labourers sit together at the foot of the table, on the bench, not on chairs, and they are the last to be given food, and the first to be given the most of it, because they will be lifting sacks in a cold field for 6 hours, and the food is part of their wage, and there is no meanness in it anywhere. They are called by their first names, and they call your husband Master, and they call you Mrs. And none of that strikes anybody at the table as strange. The hired girl does not sit down at all at first. She stands and fetches, and takes the pan off the heat, and goes to the door for more coal, and eats standing at the end of the dresser in the gaps, and will sit for perhaps 4 minutes near the end when the fetching has slowed. She is 15. In 3 years she will marry, most likely, and in her own kitchen she will be the one at the head of it. And this stretch of standing up to eat is understood by everybody, including her, as the training that gets her there. And you do not sit either. You are at the fire, you are at the table, you are at the dresser, you are cutting more bread, because the bread has gone faster than you allowed for. You are catching the youngest one's cup before it goes over. You are putting a hand flat on the shoulder of the second boy to stop him reaching across. You are pouring. You are lifting. You are answering your husband's question about whether the grey mare was sound this morning without turning round. You eat some bacon off the end of a knife standing at the hearth. You drink half a cup of tea at some point that you could not name afterwards. If somebody were to come to the door in this half hour and ask who at that table was working, every honest person in the room would point at the 2 men on the bench at the foot, and the 2 men on the bench at the foot would be the first to say so. And they would all be describing something real, and they would all be leaving out the only person in the room who has not sat down since 4:30. Then, quite suddenly, it ends. Your husband stands, and the standing of the head of the table is the signal, and the 2 labourers are up half a second behind him. Boots, the scrape of the bench, somebody's hat off the hook by the door, a brief exchange about the far field and whether the gap in the hedge has been stopped. The eldest boy going out with them, pulling his coat straight, 12 years old, and walking on the outside of the group, in the way boys do when they have recently been permitted to. The door goes, the latch drops, cold air comes across the flagstones, one last time, and then the room settles. And the noise level in the kitchen falls by 2/3, and the light through the window has come up enough that you can see the crumbs and the fat congealing on 4 plates, and the milk jug down to its last inch, and the fire wants making up, and the water wants heating again. And there is a churn standing scalded and empty against the dairy wall 3 hours ahead of schedule. The house is entirely yours now. That is not a rest. It is the beginning of the part of the day when there is nobody left to see any of it. 7 o'clock, or near enough, that the difference does not matter to anyone but the clock. The younger 3 are still at the table, which is to say they are on the bench, which is to say 2 of them are on the bench, and the youngest is under it. And the business of the next 20 minutes is getting 2 of them out of the door in a condition that will not embarrass you. This is a real consideration. A farm child arriving at the village school with a dirty collar is a statement about the farm, and about you, and the schoolmistress will not say anything, and everyone will know anyway. So, faces washed at the basin with water you heated for the 3rd time this morning. Hands, which are worse. The boy of 9 has something on his sleeve that you decide not to investigate. The girl of 6 has hair that has been slept on badly, and comes apart under the comb in a way that makes her yell, and you hold the back of her head steady with one hand and work upward from the ends with the other, because you learned 20 years ago that you start at the bottom and not the top, and that is one of perhaps 400 small pieces of knowledge you carry that nobody has ever written down. Bread and dripping wrapped in a cloth, clogs on, the door, and you keep the eldest girl back. She is 11. She knows before you say it. She has known since last night, when you looked at the churn and looked at the weather and said nothing at all, and she watched you not say it. And this morning she has already tied her apron without being asked, which is its own kind of remark. Here is where the day becomes a question of arithmetic rather than affection. And it is worth slowing down for, because the arithmetic is only 1 year old. The Elementary Education Act passed in 1870, and the country is still discovering what it means. It does not, in this first stretch, make school compulsory everywhere in the way people now assume. What it does is authorize school boards to be formed where provision is thin, and it allows those boards to make attendance compulsory in their districts, and to charge a small weekly fee, and to appoint an officer whose entire occupation is finding out which children are not where they should be. Some districts move fast. Some move not at all. Compulsion across the whole of England will not arrive properly until 1880, and free elementary schooling not until the 90s. So in this September, on this farm, what you are dealing with is not a law exactly. It is a pressure, a direction of travel, a sense arriving from somewhere over the horizon that the practice of keeping a child at home to work is becoming something you can be asked about. The fee is a few pence a week per child. Call it 2p, sometimes 3p, sometimes a penny for the 3rd child of a family. It sounds small. Set it against the fact that a farm labourer in this county is bringing home somewhere near 12 or 13 shillings a week, and that you have 4 children, and that the fee is payable whether the weather is good or the harvest is late or the pig has died, and it stops sounding small quite quickly. That is the visible cost. The invisible cost is the one that actually decides things. A child of 11, on a farm of this size, is not a mouth. She is a pair of hands worth roughly 1/3 of an adult woman's output in the dairy, and rather more than that in the poultry yard. where the work is fiddly rather than heavy, and small, fingers are frankly better at it. Send her to school 6 days a week, and you have not lost twopence. You have lost about 15 hours of skilled labour that you will now perform yourself, on top of your own, at the end of a day that already has no end. So the calculation is made, and it is made every single morning, and it is made by you. Understand what that means. Your husband holds the lease. Your husband decides which field goes to wheat, and which to roots, and whether the old mare is done, and whether to take the extra acre when the neighbour gives it up. Nobody consults you, and nobody would think to. But nobody consults him about which child stays home either. The house and the yard and the dairy are yours to run, and the children belong to the house until they are big enough to be sent to the fields. And so the question of who gets educated and who does not is a household question, and household questions are answered at the kitchen end of the table. You would like to be told what to do about it. You are not going to be, and the answer, in this household as in most, falls where it usually falls. The boys go. The boys go because a boy who can read and cipher, can keep accounts, can take a place in a shop, can write to a man in Canada about land, can leave. The eldest girl stays. She stays because she is capable, which is exactly the reason it is unfair, and because there is nobody else to do what she does, and because you can teach her the things you think she will actually need, and because a part of you that you do not examine very closely believes she will end up doing this in a kitchen like this, and that the reading will not have altered it. She reads a little. She reads well enough for a recipe and a hymn book and the writing on a sack. She does not read the way her brother of 9 already reads, which is to say, fluently and idly and for pleasure, sprawled on the settle with a borrowed thing about ships. You are not comfortable with this. You do it anyway. Both of those are true at the same time, and they will both still be true in the evening, and there is a churn waiting. Let us take the wider view for a moment, because childhood on a farm in this decade is not the thing the word childhood now suggests. Work begins at about 4. Not real work, but the shape of it. A child of 4 scares birds off the seedbed, carries something small from one end of the yard to the other, holds a gate, sits with the baby. A child of 6 is properly useful. Feeding hens, collecting the eggs from the accessible nests, fetching kindling, turning the handle of things while somebody else does the part requiring judgment. A child of 9 can be trusted alone with the poultry, can weed, can carry water in a small bucket, can mind 2 younger ones for an hour while their mother is in the dairy with a cheese that will not wait. A child of 12 is a worker. At 12, a boy goes with the men and is paid something nominal or nothing at all, and a girl of 12 is doing everything her mother does at perhaps 2/3 the speed and 3/4 the quality, and is being corrected constantly, and is learning a trade nobody will ever call a trade. By 14, a great many of them are gone. The boys to a neighbouring farm as living-in servants, hired at a statute fare for a year at a time. The girls into domestic service in the market town, or further, which is the single largest occupation for women in the country in this decade, and which is where a farm girl's training in dairy work and cleaning and management makes her genuinely valuable and genuinely cheap. So when you keep your eldest daughter home this morning, You are not interrupting her childhood. You are conducting her apprenticeship. That is how you would describe it if anyone asked in those words. And it is not a lie, and it is also not the whole of it. And you know the difference perfectly well. The two of you go through to the back, and you set her on the eggs and the hen house because you want the churn yourself, and she goes without saying anything. And at the doorway, she says, quite mildly, that the schoolmistress is doing the counties this month. Not as an argument, as information. She has learned already, at 11, that information delivered flatly is more effective than a request, which is a thing about this household she can only have learned from watching you. You say that she can have Thursday. She says nothing at all to that, and goes out into the yard, and you hear her talking to the hens in the particular voice that children use for animals they intend to be obeyed by. The toddler is still under the table, 2 years and some months, at the stage where he has recently discovered that he can move faster than you can react, and the entire architecture of your morning now bends around this fact. He goes on the flagstones by the hearth, on a folded sack, at a distance from the fire that you have calculated so precisely you no longer think about it. And he gets a wooden spoon and an upturned tin, and that arrangement will buy you somewhere between 20 minutes and an hour, and there is no way to know which in advance. There are no others to help. Your mother is 11 miles off and old. There is no nursery, no nurse, no separate room where a child is kept while a woman works. The child is in the room where the work is, always. And every task you perform for the next 4 hours will be performed with one ear tuned to a particular pitch of noise, and with a piece of your attention permanently withheld from what your hands are doing. That withheld piece never comes back. Not today, not this year. It is subtracted from every single task, and it appears in no account of anything. The churn is scalded. The cream has been standing since the skimming. The kitchen has gone quiet enough that you can hear the tin ringing under the spoon and the hens outside, and your daughter's voice among them. And the light through the window is the flat white of a September morning that is not going to warm up much. You sit down to the churn. That is the first time you have sat since 4:30, and you have sat down to work. The churn is an end-over-end barrel on a wooden frame, a thing about the size of a small beer cask, and it turns by a handle on the side. Some households still use the plunge churn, the upright one with the staff you drive down and pull up, down and up. And if you had grown up 10 miles further west, that is what you would be using now. Your mother used one. You have used one. The barrel is better, and you will not be talked out of it. The handle goes over at a steady pace, not fast. That is the thing nobody tells you, and everybody learns. Fast does not make butter come. Fast makes the cream slop and froth and hold its air and stay exactly what it was. The motion has to be even, roughly 60 turns to the minute, and it has to go on being even for as long as the cream requires. And the cream does not tell you in advance how long that is. On a good morning in October, cream at the right temperature, cream from cows on decent late grass, the butter comes in 25 minutes. You have had it come in 18. You have also stood at this churn in July for an hour and 40 minutes, with your arms gone to water and the cream refusing, going thick and greasy and sullen and never breaking. and at the end of it produced a soft, pale mess that would not keep 3 days. Temperature is the whole of it. Somewhere around 55 degrees is what you want the cream to be, and you have no thermometer. Some dairies have them. The larger ones, the ones with the proper dairymaid on wages, sometimes have a floating glass thermometer that costs 2 shillings and 6pence, and is the single most useful thing in the room. You judge by the back of your hand against the side of the crock, and by how the cream moves when you tilt it. And you are right most of the time, because you have been doing this since you were 9 years old. So you turn the handle. The sound tells you everything. For the first stretch, it is a slosh, liquid and heavy and shapeless. Then it thickens, and the note goes duller, and the handle gets harder. And this is the part where your shoulders begin to complain. And this is also the part where most of the failures happen, because it is the part where the cream is deciding. And then, if it is going to happen, the note breaks. There is a moment, and it is unmistakable, where the sound goes from a thick churning to a distinct slapping, a wet knocking, and that means the grains have come, and you stop. You stop immediately. Turning past that point beats the grains into a solid mass and drives the buttermilk into it and traps it there, and butter with buttermilk in it goes rancid. And butter that goes rancid is not butter. It is an insult you have posted to a dealer with your name on it. Off comes the lid. Inside, the cream has split into 2 entirely separate substances. Pale yellow grains the size of wheat kernels floating in thin bluish liquid. And that transformation never stops being satisfying. Not after 25 years. You draw off the buttermilk through the plug hole into a crock. It goes to the pigs, mostly. Some of it goes into the bread. Some of it the children drink, and the youngest likes it, which is a small mercy, since he is drinking a food that costs the household nothing. Now the washing. Cold water into the churn, over the grains, and turn again gently, and draw it off, and again, until the water comes off clear. 3 washings, sometimes 4. Every trace of buttermilk left in the butter is a day taken off its life. In summer, you go down to the well twice for water cold enough. This is where scalded hands go raw, because you have gone from water hot enough to scald the churn to water cold enough to shock twice a day, every day, for 11 years of marriage and a decade of girlhood before it. And the skin on your hands is the skin of a woman who is not 34. The grains come out onto the working slab, which is sycamore, because sycamore does not taint and does not take a stain. You have a pair of Scotch hands, ribbed wooden paddles, and you never once touch the butter with your fingers. Warmth from a hand marks butter. It leaves a soft patch that goes off first, and a dealer knows exactly what that patch is and exactly what it says about the dairy it came from. With the paddles, you work the grains together and press the last water out, and it runs off the slab in thin, pale threads, and you work it and press and fold and press, and this takes a quarter of an hour of steady attention. In goes the salt, about an ounce to the pound if it is for keeping, less if it goes to market tomorrow. Salt is preservative and seasoning at once, and the amount is a judgment, and every dairy's judgment is slightly different, and a regular customer will notice within 1 mouthful if you change yours. Then the printing. You weigh off the pounds and half pounds on the beam scale, and each one goes into the wooden print and comes out with a design pressed into the top of it, and yours is a wheat sheaf with 3 small marks beside it. Some dairies use a swan, a cow, a thistle, a rose. It is not decoration, it is a signature. Here is what that signature does. Your butter goes to a dealer in the market town, and that dealer sells it on, and it may travel 40 miles by rail and reach a grocer's counter in a town where nobody has ever heard of this farm or your husband or you. The person who buys it there cannot possibly know where it came from. What they know is that the wheat sheaf butter was good the last 3 times, and so they will pay for it again. That is the entire mechanism. Reputation, moving through a system where nobody involved knows your name, and everybody involved knows your mark. And the reverse works just as fast. A dealer can refuse you outright. He will open a pound, smell it, taste it, look at the color, feel it between the paddles, and if it is streaky or wet or overworked or faintly sour, he will tell you he cannot take it, or he will take it at a lower grade for cooking fat at maybe 2/3 the price. Do that twice in a season, and he stops looking at your crate first. And once he stops looking at your crate first, you are selling into whatever price is left at the end of the morning. So it is worth being clear about what is happening on that slab. This is a manufacturing process with a quality standard, a reputation attached to a registered mark, and a direct financial consequence for variation. In any other context, it would be called a trade. It required an apprenticeship of roughly 10 years, served under a woman who criticized your work daily. It is judged in an open market by professional buyers. And nobody, including you, would ever describe you as a skilled tradeswoman, because the work happens in the room where you also cook the dinner. And there is no word in circulation for a craft performed in a kitchen by a wife. The butter goes into the cool corner of the dairy under a cloth. 11 pounds today. Not a bad Thursday. Now the cheese, which is the larger and slower thing, and which you started 3 days ago and will not finish for months. Cheese is where the dairy stops being a daily chore and becomes a long investment. You set the morning milk with rennet, whole milk, not skimmed, and that alone is a decision. Because milk that goes into cheese does not go into butter, and does not get sold sweet. It curdles in the tub. You cut the curd, and the cutting matters, because coarse cutting leaves whey trapped, and fine cutting loses fat into the whey. And there is a size you are aiming for that has never been written down anywhere in this house, and that your hands simply know. You scald it, drain it, break it, salt it, and pack it into the mold lined with cheesecloth. Then it goes under the press, a great stone weight on a lever, and it stays there under increasing pressure for 2 days, and it is turned and reclothed and returned each time, and each turning is a lift of something heavy in a cold room. And then the truckle goes onto a shelf in the cheese room, and the real work begins, which is that you must attend to it for the next 6 to 9 months. Turn it, rub it, watch it for cracks and for the wrong sort of mold, and for the telltale swelling that means it has gone wrong inside and cannot be saved. There are 20-some cheeses on those shelves at any time, in every stage, and each one is a portion of your summer milk converted into a thing that will still be food and still be money in February. A good cheese might weigh 12 pounds and sell at 6 pence or 7 pence the pound. A whole shelf of them is real money, more than the butter, and it is money that took 9 months of unpaid attention to arrive at. And if the cheese room damps, or the summer turns, or a batch of rennet goes odd, the loss is not a bad afternoon. The loss is a season. You wipe the slab down, you scald the churn, the paddles, the prints, the strainers, and you set them to drain, and you carry the buttermilk crock out towards the pigs, and your youngest has been at the tin and the spoon for nearly 40 minutes, which is at the generous end of the range, and you will take it. Your arms are shaking slightly. Not from strain exactly, from having done one motion at one speed for a very long time. Your hands are red to the wrists, and the knuckles have split in the usual place, and you rub a little butter into them, which is the only cure anyone has ever offered you, and which works about as well as you would expect. The light in the yard has barely shifted. It is 9:20 in the morning. The yard is a different country from the dairy, and you cross into it the way you cross into any place that has its own rules. The dairy is cold and still and demands silence and a light hand. The yard is loud, filthy, alive, and demands that you be quicker than the things in it. You come out with the buttermilk crock against your hip, and the hens see you before you see them. They always do. There are perhaps 40 birds on the place, though the number is never quite fixed, and nobody has ever written it down. And they come at a low run from 4 directions, with that ridiculous shoulder-forward gait. And the cockerel comes last, unhurried, as though he had been on his way anyway. You scatter what you have. Household scraps, mostly. The scrapings of the porridge pot, crusts too hard for the men, the outer leaves of things, a handful of tail corn from the barn floor, which is the poorest grain of the crop, and which is understood to be the hen's portion, because it would not fetch anything at market. Nothing on a farm of this kind is thrown away. It is only redirected downwards, from people to birds to pigs, to the muck heap to the field, and the field gives it back as wheat in 9 months' time. And that circle is the entire economy of the place, expressed in a single sentence. Then you go looking for eggs, which is the part of the morning that is genuinely a hunt. The henhouse gives up its share easily enough. There are nesting boxes along one wall, and you go along them with your apron gathered up in your left hand to make a pouch, lifting each bird where a bird is sitting, taking what is underneath, feeling for warmth. Some of them go quietly. One of them, a brown hen with a bent toe, who has been personally unpleasant to you since spring, comes off the nest sideways with her neck out, and gets you across the back of the wrist. And you take the eggs anyway, and tell her what you think of her, and she tells you what she thinks of you. But hens do not confine themselves to the boxes provided. A hen wants somewhere hidden, and the yard offers 100 places. And so the rest of the search takes you along the back of the stable in the nettles, under the cart, into the loose straw at the end of the barn, behind the water butt, up into the low fork of the elder, where a hen once managed a nest of 9, and no one found it until the shells were empty. You know most of the usual places. You check them in an order your feet have worked out over 11 years, without your ever deciding on it. 22 eggs this morning, which is respectable for late September. The birds are slowing. They will slow further as the light goes, and by December you will be getting 3 or 4 a day if you are fortunate, and the price will double. And this is the arrangement that the whole country runs on, without anyone thinking it remarkable. Eggs are cheap in June when nobody wants them, and dear in January when everybody does. In a good week in spring, you might send 8 or 9 dozen to market. In midwinter, you keep what you get for the house and count yourself lucky. You put them into the crock in the pantry, pointed end down, and you do it carefully, because a cracked egg is a penny gone, and pennies are the whole business here. Here is the thing that is easy to misunderstand about the poultry. It looks like a hobby. It looks like something a woman does around the edges of the day, a bit of pottering with birds, decorative almost. But the eggs and the butter together are the money that keeps the household turning between harvests, and the poultry is entirely yours. Your husband does not feed the hens. He would not know which one is broody. He could not tell you what a dozen fetched last Thursday. If you asked him how many birds were on the place, he would guess, and he would guess wrong, and it would not embarrass him, because that knowledge is not understood to be his. The yard, in other words, is a woman's ground in the same way the fields are a man's, and this division is so complete and so unspoken that neither of you has ever named it out loud. Beyond the gate, in the wheat and the turnips and the pasture, the work is his, the decisions are his, the labourers answer to him. Inside the gate, in the yard, and the dairy, and the pig-sty, and the hen-house, and the kitchen, and the garden, the work is yours, and the decisions are yours, and the hired girl answers to you. He would no more tell you when to set a hen than you would tell him when to cut. It is a real authority. It is the only real authority you have. And it exists precisely because it is not counted as authority, because the yard is small and the fields are large, because his work makes the rent and yours only makes the difference between managing and not managing. That is how the arrangement survives. You are given absolute command of a territory on the understanding that nobody will ever describe it as command. The pigs are round the other side, and you can hear them before you turn the corner, because pigs hear a buttermilk crock the way hens see an apron. There are 2 of them this year. A sow, who has had 1 litter and will have another, and a young hog being brought on for killing. And the hog is where the household's actual savings are kept. Not in a bank. There is no bank. There is a tin on the shelf, and there is a pig in the sty, and the pig is by far the larger sum. He has been fed since spring on things that cost nothing, or nearly nothing. Buttermilk and whey from the dairy, which would otherwise be waste. Potato peelings, windfall apples from the 2 trees at the end of the orchard. Small potatoes, chat potatoes, the ones too little to bother with for the table. Acorns and beech mast, when the children can be sent to gather them. Barley meal in the last weeks, because the last weeks are where the fat comes from, and fat is the point. He will go something over 16 stone when the time comes, which is more than 200 pounds of animal, and the greater part of that will be bacon and ham and salt pork in the brine tubs, and it will feed 9 people through a winter in which almost nothing else on the farm is producing anything at all. Reckon it in money, and the sum is startling. That pig, killed and cured, represents somewhere near £4 of value in a year, when a farm labourer's wage is around 12 shillings the week. He is, in other words, 6 or 7 weeks of a grown man's earnings, standing in a sty, eating things you would have thrown away. That is why the pig is watched. That is why a pig that goes off its feed is a genuine household crisis, and a pig that dies before killing time is a disaster you talk about for years. You tip the buttermilk in, and he puts his whole face into it, and the sound is tremendous. The geese are down by the pond, 7 of them, and they see you and lower their heads and come up the slope in a line with their necks out, hissing, which is what geese do, and which stopped frightening you a decade ago. You do not feed them much. Geese find their own living off grass, which is why every cottager who has any right to a common keeps them, and they cost you nothing but the annoyance of their opinions. They will be worth a good deal at Michaelmas, and more at Christmas, and the down and feathers go into the beds, and the pillows, and the quilts, and nothing about a goose is wasted either. The ducks are on the pond, and are no trouble to anyone. But the geese bring you to the reckoning that hangs over the whole yard at this time of year. The sum you have been doing quietly in your head since the mornings turned cold. Everything here has to be sorted into 2 categories before the winter closes in. What is kept and what is not. You cannot feed everything through to spring. There is not the grain, and there is not the space, and there is no sense in wintering a bird that will not lay. So you go along the hens with your eye, over the course of a week or 2, and you decide. That one is in her 3rd year, and did poorly through the summer, and she goes. The old cockerel is slow, and the young one is ready, and so the old one goes. Those 2 pullets are strong, and they stay. It is not sentimental, and it is not cruel. It is arithmetic performed on living things, and every farm woman in England is doing the same arithmetic this month. And it is a skill that takes years to acquire, and that no one has ever thought to call a skill. The same reckoning applies to the sow, who stays because she breeds, and to the hog, who does not, and to the 2 geese you will keep for next year's stock, and to the 5 who will not see November. You stand a moment at the gate with the empty crock and do a final count of it all. 40 odd birds, 2 pigs, 7 geese, the ducks, the cheese room, the butter crocks, the brine tubs waiting empty in the back place. All of it yours to hold in your head, none of it written anywhere. Your boots have gone in past the ankle in the churned ground by the sty, and you have to lean on the post to pull the left one clear. There is muck to the top of your stockings, and you have not the time to change them, and would not anyway before dinner, because it is 11:15, and the fire wants building up, and the potatoes are not on, and the meal that has to be on that table at noon for 9 people is at this moment still entirely a plan. And from the far side of the hedge, faint and getting nearer, comes the sound of the men. You go in through the back door at a run that is not quite a run, because a farm woman does not run, but the pace you take across the yard is the fastest thing that has moved in it all morning. The kitchen is dim after the white September light outside, and it smells of ash and of the milk you carried through it 3 hours ago. The fire has sunk to a red heart under grey. You rake it forward, feed it with the split ash from the basket by the hearth, and set the bellows to it until the flame comes up yellow and takes hold. Then you swing the crane out and hang the big pot, and go to the back place for the potatoes. and by the time you are back, the water is already thinking about heat. There is a particular kind of arithmetic that runs in your head at this hour, and it has nothing to do with money. It is time against fire. The potatoes want 3/4 of an hour. The bacon is boiled already from last night, and only wants warming through. The pudding wants an hour, and it has been in since 9:30, which is the only reason any of this is possible. The greens want 10 minutes and no more, or they go to slime. The gravy wants the last 5. Everything has to arrive at the same moment on a hearth that can hold 3 pots, and an oven that holds one thing at a time. And it has to arrive at noon, because at noon 9 people will sit down, and the field work will resume at 1, whether the food has been eaten or not. This is the meal that matters. Understand that clearly, because the word dinner has drifted a long way since. Dinner is the middle of the day. It is the largest meal, the hot meal, the one the whole working household eats together, and it is served at noon or as near to it as makes no difference. What comes at 6 or 7 in the evening is supper, and it is a small thing, bread and cheese and whatever is cold. The gentry in the towns have already begun pushing their dinner later and later into the evening, and lighting candles for it. And that migration will eventually reach the countryside, but not here, and not this year. Here the day is built around the noon meal, because the day is built around daylight, and men who have been mowing since 7 need feeding in the middle of it, or they will not be worth anything by 4. So what is on the table? There is a bacon collar, boiled yesterday, and sliced cold and warmed, from the pig you killed last autumn, and salted down in the brine tub in the back place, and it has been feeding this household in slices ever since. There are potatoes, a great many of them, from your own ground. There are greens, cabbage this week, from the garden strip you keep behind the house, and that no man on this farm has ever put a spade into. There is a sweat pudding, boiled in a cloth, made with flour and beef suet, and a little of the dripping crock, and it is there because it is cheap, and it fills men up, and it goes down before the meat does, which means less meat is wanted. There is bread from Monday's baking, cut thick. There is a jug of small beer, and a jug of milk, and a pot of tea for you and the girl. That is a good dinner. That is a farm eating well. There is meat on the table on an ordinary Thursday, and there are men in the villages 10 miles from here who see meat twice a week if they are fortunate, and their wives make the same sweet pudding for a very different reason. But there are not 9 at the table today. There are 11. Because it is late September, and the barley is in, but the potatoes are not, and your husband took on 2 extra men from the village on Monday to get the roots up before the weather turns. And when a farmer of 90 acres hires day labor in the busy season, he hires them at a wage, plus their food. That is the arrangement. 2 shillings and 6pence a day, and their dinner, or 3 shillings a day, and find themselves, and every man of them takes the 2 and 6 and the dinner, because a dinner like this one is worth more than the 6pence, and everybody in the transaction knows it. Which means the 6pence a day your husband saved on those 2 men's wages is a 6pence you are now cooking. It is worth sitting with that for a moment. The hiring was his decision, made in the yard, in a conversation you were not part of. The cost of it lands entirely in your kitchen, in your fire, in your flour bin, in your bacon. and in the extra half hour of your day. It appears in no account book anywhere. If the farm's takings were written out at the end of the year, the line would read 2 men at 2 and 6 for 11 days, and the food those men ate would be invisible, absorbed into the general fact of the house, which is to say, absorbed into you. Farm accounts of this period, where they survive, are honest about the wages and almost entirely silent about the board. Historians who have gone through them carefully put the real cost of feeding a hired man at somewhere between 4 and 6 shillings a week, which is to say, a substantial fraction of what he was paid in coin. On a farm like this one, running perhaps 4 extra hands through the harvest weeks, the food alone comes to a sum a farmer would notice keenly if anybody ever put it in front of him in a column. Nobody ever does. The flour is there because you baked it. The bacon is there because you salted it. The vegetables are there because you grew them. The whole enormous subsidy passes through your hands and out again, and the ledger records that the harvest was got in cheaply this year. The potatoes are on the boil. You lift the pudding cloth out with the long fork, and the steam comes up off it and fogs the little window over the slop stone, and you set it in a basin to drain. The dog barks once in the yard. That is the men at the gate. You send the girl for the plates, and she has them down off the rack and onto the table in a clatter. The 11-year-old comes in with the little one on her hip and sets her in the corner by the settle. There is a scrape of boots at the door, and men coming in already talking. The 2 village men hanging back a half step because they are not of the house. Your husband first, the carter after him, the boy who does the horses last, with his hands black to the wrist, and they wash, which is to say they take the water you have had standing warm in the bowl on the bench since 11:30 for exactly this purpose, and they use it one after another, and it is grey by the 4th man, and nobody remarks on it, and it will need throwing out and refilling before the afternoon. Then they sit, and the sitting has an order to it. Your husband at the head, the village men at the far end, together on the bench, the carter next to them, the children where they fit, the girl at the end nearest the fire, because she will be up and down, and you do not sit. This is the part of the day that is hardest to convey to anyone who has not done it, because from the outside it looks like nothing. The room is full of people eating and talking, and one person moving, and the moving is not counted as anything. You carve the bacon at the side table. You bring the potatoes and go back for the greens. You take the pudding round, and it goes twice. Somebody wants more bread, and you cut it. The little one puts her hand out towards the milk jug, and you move it without looking. The village man at the end has an empty plate and does not like to ask, and you see it and you fill it, because if a hired man goes back to the village saying, "They feed you poorly up there," that is a thing said about you and not about your husband, and it will be repeated at the door of the public house, and it will make hiring harder next year. You eat standing in pieces. A forkful of potato taken from the side table between one errand and the next. A slice of bread with a bit of bacon on it, eaten by the fire while you watch the pot. Half a cup of tea gone cold. If somebody asked you at 4 o'clock whether you had eaten your dinner, you would say yes, and you would not be lying exactly, and you would not be able to say what it had been. The talk over the table is the field, how the ground is holding on the far side, whether the weather turns Saturday, what the man at the mill said about the price of barley. Your husband asks you a thing about the butter money without turning round, and you answer it over his shoulder while reaching past him for the empty greens dish. And he grunts, and the conversation moves on. And that exchange was the household's financial planning for the week. They are done by 20 to 1. Farm men eat fast because they have always eaten fast. There is a shifting of the bench, a scrape of boots. Somebody says something to the boy about the grey mares off 4, and they go out into the yard one after another, and the door bangs, and the room drops into quiet. There are 11 plates on the table. You stand for a moment with your hand on the back of a chair. The little one is asleep sideways in the corner of the settle with a crust in her fist. The fire has burned down to what you need for washing water and no more. And that is deliberate, because you built it that way an hour ago, knowing this is where it would be. Then you take the big pot off the crane and carry it to the slopstone and pour, and the steam goes up again, and the girl brings the plates over 4 at a time, and it is 1:45 on a Thursday in September. And there is the whole of the afternoon still ahead of you, and not one thing in it done yet. The washing up takes until 1, and by then the cart is already half loaded, because you loaded it before dinner while the potatoes were on. Thursday is market day in the town, and the town is 7 miles off by road, and the road is not good. You go once a week from spring through to the back end of the year, and less often in the deep winter when the butter falls off and the roads are worse. It is not an outing. Nobody in this house would ever call it an outing. It is the day the farm turns what it has made into coins, and it is the only day of the week that a coin comes into the house at all. What goes into the cart? 2 baskets of eggs, packed in oat chaff, 4 dozen and some, with the cracked ones held back for the house. 11 pounds of butter in the printed half-pound blocks, wrapped in cloth, laid in a shallow crate with a wetted cloth over the top, and a board over that, because butter that arrives soft arrives worth less. A basket of plums off the 2 trees by the pigsty, more than the house can use. A pair of fowls, killed and drawn this morning before you did anything else, which is why you were in the yard at 5, in a way you have not mentioned to anyone since. 2 cheeses from the summer, small ones, the earliest of that batch, which you have decided are ready, and about which you have a private and not entirely settled opinion. You go in the cart with the pony, and you take the eldest girl, because 2 pairs of hands are needed at a stall, and because she has to learn it. And learning it is a thing that happens by standing next to you for 4 hours, and not by being told. The road takes an hour and a bit. You wear the good bonnet, which is 11 years old, and has been retrimmed 3 times, most recently with a length of ribbon bought at this same market in the spring for 4pence. You are not dressed to impress anybody. You are dressed so that the dealer does not look at you and think that here is a woman who is desperate. The market is a paved square with a covered cross in the middle of it, and stalls set out along 2 sides. Butter and eggs and poultry go under the cross. You have stood in the same place for 9 years, because that is how it works, and if you did not come 1 week, somebody would ask after you. There are 2 ways to sell butter, and you use both, depending on the week. The first is to a dealer. A dealer buys the whole lot at once, in one transaction, and pays in one handful, and you are out from under the cross by 2:30 and home before dark. The dealer pays you less than the public would. He is buying to sell on, in the town, or up the line by rail to a bigger place, and the difference between what he pays and what he gets is his living. This week, the dealer offers you 11 pence the pound for the lot. The second is to stand and sell it yourself, £0.5 by £0.5, to women who come to the cross with baskets, at a shilling or a shilling, and a penny the pound. That is more money. It is also 3 hours of standing, and it is 3 hours in which the butter is sitting in the warm, and at the end of it you may have £2 left over that nobody wanted, and that you will carry home again. So there is a negotiation, and it is a real one, and you are good at it. You tell him £10 of it at a shilling, and he can have it now and go. He says 11 pence for the lot or nothing. You say nothing then, and you begin, quite unhurriedly, to lift the board off the crate, as though you are settling in for the afternoon, and you do not look at him while you do it. He watches you do that. He knows what you are doing, and you know that he knows, and neither of you says a word about it, and this is the part that anybody watching would think was silence, and that is in fact the whole of the transaction. He comes back at 11 pence halfpenny for the lot, and takes the 2 cheeses at a price that is fair, and no better than fair. And you take it, because the sky has gone, the colour it goes before rain, and because your cheese is young, and you know it. 10 shillings and 11 pence for the butter. The eggs go at 9 pence the dozen, and there are 4 dozen and 5, so 3 shillings and 3 pence, and a bit. The fowls make 2, and 6 the pair. The plums make 1 and 2. The girl sells the plums entirely on her own, and gets a penny more than you would have taken. And you say nothing about that either. But you notice it, and you will remember it in about 4 years, when there is a decision to make about her. 18 shillings and 11 pence, all told. Now, it is worth stopping over that number, because on its own, it does not tell you anything. An agricultural labourer in the Midlands in this decade is earning somewhere around 12 to 14 shillings a week. And out of that, a family is paying rent, buying every scrap of bread it eats, buying candles and coal and boots and cloth. 13 shillings a week is a family's entire subsistence, and it is thin, and everybody in this parish knows exactly how thin, because they can see it from the outside. You have just made more in one afternoon under a market cross than a grown man makes in a full 6-day week of field work. And you did it on top of the rest of it. The butter was churned before 10 this morning. The eggs were gathered by a child. The fowls were killed at 5. Not 1 hour of the field work stopped for any of it. The dairy and the yard sit inside the working day of the farm, like a second farm folded into the first one, and it runs on your hours, and on hours that most accounts of farming in this century do not trouble to count at all. Across the year, it comes to something. In a good year, on a place like this, with 8 cows and a decent flock of hens, the butter and egg and poultry money will run to somewhere near £40. The rent on 90 acres is perhaps 130. So this, the thing done in the gaps, the thing that is not the farm, covers something close to 1/3 of the rent. More than that, and this is the part that matters more than the total. It is the only money that comes in regularly. The corn is sold once, at harvest. The beasts are sold when they are sold. The rent falls due at Michaelmas and at Lady Day in 2 great lumps, and between those dates, the farm is a place with a great deal of value in it and almost no cash. What buys the tea and the sugar and the boys' boots and the doctor when the doctor is wanted is the tin on the dairy shelf, filled a shilling at a time on Thursdays. And here is where it becomes worth being precise about the law, because the law about that tin has just changed, and it has just changed in a way that sounds much larger than it is. Until last year, a married woman in England had, in law, essentially nothing. On marriage, everything she owned outright became her husband's. Anything she earned afterwards became his the moment she earned it. She could not make a will of her own goods without his consent. She could not sue, or be sued, or hold a lease, or sign a contract in her own right. In the phrase the lawyers used, her legal existence was suspended during the marriage and folded into his. The name for it is coverture, and it was not a piece of cruelty invented by anybody in particular. It was simply the frame the whole thing sat inside, and it had sat there for centuries, and the men who administered it mostly regarded it as a form of protection. Last year, in 1870, Parliament passed a Married Women's Property Act, and everybody talked about it, and it did much less than the talk suggested. What it did was allow a married woman to keep her own wages and earnings from work carried on separately from her husband, and to keep money she inherited up to a limit, and to hold a savings account in her own name. What it did not do was touch the great bulk of it. Property she brought to the marriage was still his, and the phrase separate from her husband did a great deal of quiet work, because a farm wife's butter money is not earned separately from her husband. It is earned from his cows, on his tenancy, with his fodder, and it belongs to him as plainly as the barley does. It will be another 11 years before an act comes that treats a married woman as a person who can own things, straightforwardly, the way anyone else does. 1882. You will be 45. It will not undo any of the years before it. So the coins go into the tin on the shelf in the dairy, and in the sight of the law, those coins are your husband's coins. And in the practice of this house, and every house in this parish, they are yours, because you made them, and because he does not count them, and because the arrangement works, and nobody wants to look at it directly. This is the ordinary condition. Custom is generous where the law is not, and custom holds right up until the day something goes wrong, and then the law is still sitting exactly where it always was. You do not think about any of that on the road home. You think about the price of 11p halfpenny, and whether you should have held out, and about the girl's penny on the plums. At home, you count it out on the dairy shelf with the door shut. 2 shillings for the shoemaker, who is owed. 6p for tea. 4p for a candle box. A shilling put by for the boys' boots, which will not last the winter, and which you have known would not last the winter since August. The rest goes in the tin, and the tin goes back on the shelf behind the salt, and the lid does not fit well, and you press it down twice. Supper is at 6, and it is the smallest meal of the day, which is fortunate, because you have very little left in you to give it. It is bread and cheese, and what was left from noon, warmed through in the pan with an onion, because warming it makes it seem like a different meal. There is tea, made from the leaves already used twice, which will be dried on the hob and used a third time tomorrow morning, before they are finally thrown to the hens. There is a bowl of milk for the youngest. The men eat quickly. They have been in the field since 7, and there is a stiffness in the way they sit down. That means the barley went well, and their backs are ruined. Nobody talks much. This is not coldness. It is the particular silence of a household where everyone has spent the day producing something, and none of them have the words left to describe it. By 6:30, the table is cleared, and here is where the day performs its most useful trick, which is to appear to end. The light goes. The men go out to the yard for the last of the beasts. The plates are washed in water, heated for the 3rd time, and an observer standing in the doorway at that hour, notebook in hand, counting what happens on this farm, would write down that the working day is over. It is not over. What follows is between 3 and 4 more hours of continuous work, and it is the portion of your labor that has never once been counted by anyone, in any ledger, in any survey, in any argument about what farms produce and who produces it. The mending basket comes down from the shelf beside the settle. It is a wide, flat basket, and it is never empty. It has not been empty in 11 years. The idea of emptying it is not a goal you hold. The basket is more like a river, and you take out of it whatever has come down since yesterday, and tomorrow there will be more. Tonight there is a shirt of your husband's gone at the elbow. There are 2 pairs of stockings. There is a pinafore with the shoulder seam split, and a boy's jacket that needs the cuffs turned because he has grown 3 inches since Easter, and the sleeves now end above his wrist bone. And there is the great slow project at the bottom of the basket, which is a good wool skirt that used to be yours and is being taken apart to become a dress for the eldest girl. Sit with the stockings first. Darning is the least interesting work in the world, and it is also, hour for hour, some of the most valuable work you do. A pair of hand-knitted wool stockings costs perhaps 1 shilling and 3 to buy, more for a man's. A household of 9 goes through them at a rate that would be alarming if you let yourself think about it. Every hole you close before it spreads is a shilling not spent, and there are perhaps a dozen holes in a normal week, and the arithmetic of that against your butter money is not small. It is a quarter of the butter money, near enough, saved by sitting still in bad light and pushing a needle over a wooden mushroom for an hour every evening. The cloth is the thing to understand here. New cloth is expensive in a way that is difficult to hold in the mind from a distance. Plain calico is running at perhaps 4 or 5 a yard. A decent wool for a working dress is more like 2 shillings, and a dress takes 6 or 7 yards, so a woman's new dress in good wool is 12 to 15 shillings before a stitch of making, which is a fortnight of a labourer's wages, which is why there are almost no new dresses. What there is instead is a long chain of transformation. A dress becomes a smaller dress becomes a pinafore becomes patches, and the patches become the lining of a quilt, and the quilt, when it finally goes, becomes rags for the dairy, and then rags for the floor, and then, at the absolute end of it, rags sold to the ragman by weight for a few pence toward paper making. Cloth in this house does not get thrown away. It gets demoted, slowly, over 10 or 15 years, until there is nothing left of it at all. So the skirt in the bottom of the basket is unpicked stitch by stitch rather than cut, because unpicking preserves the full width of every piece, and the pieces are turned so the faded side goes inward, and the good wool that has been against your legs for 6 years will be against your daughters for another 4. You do this by firelight and 1 candle. You do it well. Nobody will ever say so. There is also the matter of what you carry in your head, which is the other half of the second shift, and the half that is even less visible than the sewing. Set the needle down for a moment. There is a slate by the dairy door with the day's dairy tally on it, and you go and mark it. How many quarts came in this morning and this evening? How many pounds of butter were made? And how many went to market? What the price was? There is a second column for eggs. There is a small notebook kept in the dresser drawer, in which you write down what is owed and by whom, because the parish runs on credit, and the credit is nearly all in your keeping. The shoemaker is owed, and has now been part paid. The blacksmith did the harrow in July, and has not been settled, and will take butter against it if you offer. The woman at the far end of the lane had 4 dozen eggs off you in the spring, when her hens went off lay, and she has been paying it back in goose feathers and 1 afternoon of harvest help, and the balance is roughly even now, but not quite. The miller takes his portion in kind. The carrier is paid weekly, in coin, always, because carriers do not extend credit, and never have. None of that is written down in any form that would satisfy a bank. Some of it is in the notebook. Much of it is simply in your memory, where you keep perhaps 30 or 40 separate small obligations running in both directions over months without confusing them, and where you also keep the state of every hen, the date every cow was served, when the sow is due, which cheese on which shelf was turned this morning, and which was not, and how many candles are left in the box. Your handwriting is not elegant. You went to a dame school in the village until you were 9, and you can read anything put in front of you, and write a plain letter, and reckon accounts in your head faster than your husband can on paper, which is common enough among farm wives, and is one of the reasons the accounts end up in your keeping in the first place. On many farms in this county, the wife keeps the books simply because she is the one who can. It does not follow that her name is on them. At about 8, there is a knock at the door, which is late for a knock. It is the woman from the cottage past the bend, and she has her middle child on her hip, and the child is hot, and has been crying since noon, and will not take anything. She has not come for a doctor, because a doctor is half a crown for a visit and a walk of 5 miles to fetch him, and she does not have half a crown. She has come to you. This happens perhaps once a fortnight, and it is a role you never asked for and cannot refuse. You have the elderflower and the chamomile drying in paper on the beam. You have goose grease. You have the syrup you made from horehound. You know which of the old remedies are worth anything, and which are simply what your mother did. And you are honest with yourself about the difference more often than you let on. You look at the child properly by the candle. You put your hand on the back of its neck. You send the woman home with chamomile, and told to keep the child cool, not wrapped, whatever her mother-in-law says. and to send her eldest up in the morning to tell you how the night went. And you say the thing you have said before, gently, which is that if it is no better by tomorrow evening, she should let you send for someone, and that you will find the money for it if it comes to that. She goes. The door shuts. The house smells of tallow and wool and the last of the fire. Candles are why the evening ends when it does. Tallow candles are perhaps 6p for £1, which is about 8 candles, and a household that burned candles freely would burn through a good deal more of the butter money than a household can afford. So you burn 1. When the work needs 2, you burn 2, and you resent it. The fire does the rest, and the fire is not good light. And this is why so much of the evening work is the work you can do with your hands while barely looking, and why the fine sewing waits for a bright afternoon in a window that will not come until Sunday. At 9, the children are counted into bed, which is a real count, 4 heads, done in the dark by touch as much as by sight, because the counting of children is not a metaphor in a house with an open well in the yard and a pond in the near field. The eldest girl is last. She's been beside you for 2 hours with a needle of her own, doing the plain seams while you do the turned cuffs, and she is 14, and she is quite good at it now, and she will be better than you inside 3 years. She says good night. You tell her the shoulder seam she did will hold, which is true. Then it is only you, and the basket, and the candle burnt down by 1/3, and the fire waiting to be banked. 9:30, and the last of the day is not rest. It is one more circuit of the place, made in the dark, in a shawl over your shoulders and pattens over your shoes, because the yard between the kitchen door and the dairy door is mud to the depth of a thumb, and has been since the rain on Tuesday. You take the candle out with you, sheltered with one hand, and the flame leans and gutters and holds. The yard is quiet in the particular way a farmyard is quiet, which is not silence at all. The pig shifts against the boards of its sty. Something small moves along the wall of the barn and stops when you stop. A cow in the shed lets out a long breath. Above the roof line, the sky has gone clear after a cloudy day, and the cold that comes with a clear September sky is already settling into the puddles, and you note it without thinking, because a clear night in late September means the dairy will be colder tomorrow than it was today, and colder is better, and the cheese on the 3rd shelf will be glad of it. That is the shape your mind has taken after 11 years. You cannot look at weather without pricing it. The dairy door swings in, and the cold of the room meets you at the threshold. A different cold from the yard, still and thick, and smelling faintly of scalded wood and salt, and something sweet underneath. You do not need the candle in here, really. You know where everything sits. But you lift it anyway, and go along the shelf the way you have gone along it every night for 11 years, and you look at each thing in turn. The pans of the evening milk, set out and settling. The cream not yet risen, but beginning. The crock of butter for the house. The smaller print, wrapped and set aside for the woman at the crossroads, who takes £2 a week and pays on Saturdays. The cheeses on the far shelf, 7 of them at various ages. The oldest turned this morning, and the youngest turned twice. You put a hand flat on the youngest. It is firming. It is doing what it should be doing. You check the muslin over the pans for flies, though there will be no flies at this hour and this temperature, and you check it anyway, because the one night you do not check is the night it matters. You check that the drain channel in the floor is clear. You check that the door at the far end that opens onto the north wall is shut fast, because it swells in wet weather and does not always catch. None of this takes more than 4 minutes. It is the least strenuous work of your entire day. It is also the reason the butter money exists, and you would no more skip it than you would skip locking the house. Then out again, and the door pulled to, and the bolt shot across, and the sound of the bolt is one of the 2 or 3 sounds that mean the day is genuinely over. Back across the yard. The patterns come off at the step, and you leave them where they always sit, tipped against the wall, so the mud dries off them by morning. The kitchen is warmer than the outside by a good deal, but not warm. The fire has burned itself down to a red bed, with no flame left in it. Banking the fire is the last real task, and the most important one. You rake the embers together into the center, tight, and you cover them over with ash, a good thick layer of it, packed but not pressed, and you leave one small breathing place at the edge. Done properly, that fire will still hold a live heart at 4:30 in the morning, and will take a handful of dry sticks and come back inside a minute. Done carelessly, it will be grey and dead, and you will spend 20 minutes at the coldest part of the day with a tinderbox and a temper, and everything downstream of the fire, the kettle, the porridge, the hot water for the dairy, will run 20 minutes late, and 20 minutes lost before dawn is never recovered. It is simply gone out of the day. So you bank it carefully, every night, with the same attention you would give a piece of fine work. Then you set the kettle on the hook where it will be, and the porridge pot beside it, and the tinderbox on the shelf in the place it lives, so that in the dark you can reach it without a light. You blow the candle out at the foot of the stairs. The stairs are known to you by their sounds. 3rd from the bottom, 7th, and the top one. You avoid the 7th out of long habit, even though nobody is awake to be woken by it. Undressing is a fast, unsentimental business in a bedroom with no fire. Boots, apron hung on the back of the door. Skirt, bodice, the stays unhooked and laid over the chair. The petticoats. You keep a shift on and a shawl within reach, and you are under the blankets in under 2 minutes, and the sheets are cold enough that you lie still for a while before the shivering stops. Your husband is already asleep, and has been for an hour. He has been in the field since 7, and he is not idle, and neither of you thinks he is. His day ended at 8. Yours ended at 20 to 10. Neither of you has ever remarked on this, because it is not a grievance. It is simply the arrangement, and the arrangement is so old and so total that it has stopped being visible from inside it. The house settles, timber contracts as the temperature drops, and something in the roof gives a small crack. The wind that came up after dark works at a loose slate somewhere over the back room, and you make a note about the slate. And that is where the trouble starts, because once one note is made, the rest arrive in a line. The cheese to be turned. The hens, because the count was down again, and there is a nest somewhere in the nettles by the barn you have not found. Thursday is market, and the crates want mending. One has a broken lath. The salt is low, half a crock, which will do for a fortnight and no more. The eldest boy's boots have gone at the toe, and there is no money for new until after Michaelmas. So they will have to go to the cobbler in the village, which is 1 shilling and 9 pence, which is 2 pounds of butter. The neighbour's child, and whether you ought to walk over tomorrow rather than wait. The rent. Michaelmas is 11 days off, and the rent is ready, or nearly ready, and there is a figure in your head for exactly how nearly, and the figure will not leave you alone. This is the part of the day that has no name and no hour. Everything the household will need for the next fortnight assembles itself behind your eyes while your body lies still. And it does this every night. And you have never once in 11 years lain down and thought about nothing. Eventually it thins out. The list goes soft at the edges. The last thing you are aware of is the wind, and then not even that. So consider what you are, in the plainest terms available. You are a skilled dairy woman. That is not a courtesy. Butter and cheese are chemistry performed by hand in an unheated room without instruments, judged by touch and smell and the colour of a break. And a dealer will refuse yours outright if you get it wrong. And yours is not refused. You are a poultry keeper who runs a flock at a profit. You are a cook who feeds 9 people and 13 in harvest on 1 open fire and 1 oven. You are a bookkeeper who holds the whole of a small business in memory, because there is no written ledger for your half of it. You are the household's nurse, and the first person a neighbour comes to at 9 at night. You are a needlewoman, a brewer, a preserver, a launderer, and the manager of a 15-year-old employee. You are good at all of it. Some of it you are better at than anyone within 4 miles. And you know it, and there is a real satisfaction in that which nobody should be asked to pretend away. And none of it exists on paper. The lease is in his name. The census taker, who came round, will write down your husband's occupation as farmer, and on your line will write wife, and that is the whole of it. And every dairy woman and poultry keeper and bookkeeper and nurse in this parish will be written down the same way. The butter money that you earned with your own hands and your own judgment was, until last year, his in-law the moment it was counted into the tin. And even now, the change in the statute is partial and awkward, and half the county does not know it applies to them. If the lease went badly, or if he died, the farm would not pass to you as the person who has been running half of it. It would be settled, or sold, or handed on, and your 11 years of it would be a domestic fact with no legal weight at all. That is not an accusation aimed at the man asleep beside you. He works. He is not cruel. He would say, if asked, that the place could not run without you, and he would mean it. It is an observation about the structure the 2 of you live inside, which neither of you designed, and which counts one of your days and not the other. Both things are true at once. The skill is real. The erasure is also real. Holding both of them is the only honest way to look at this house. Downstairs, the fire is banked and breathing under its grey lid of ash, keeping just enough heat to be woken in 7 hours. The dairy door is bolted. Along its cold shelf, in the dark, the muslin lies pale over the pans. A long, soft line of milk-white cloth, going faintly luminous, where the window lets in what light there is. Outside, the wind drops. The slate stops. The house holds still,